That's right. God told them to kill every child, woman, man, completely wipe out all of the Amalekites. That's what we're going to get into in today's video. And before we get started with today's video, let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about God ordering the death of women, children, suckling, and men, and wiping out the whole Amalekites? Let me know in the comment section below. So the piece of text we've basically just referred to in the beginning of this video is taken from 1 Samuel chapter 15. And some people say, if God's so loving, why would he tell people to wipe out women and children? So like I've already mentioned, the first thing we need to focus on is taken from the book of 1 Samuel. It's 1 Samuel 15 verse 1 to 3. 1 Samuel 15 verse 1 to 3, and it reads, Samuel also said unto Saul, The Lord sent me to anoint thee king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and women, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. And the scripture basically goes on to talk about how Saul gathered his people and actually went to take part in this procedure. Now, some people look at the Bible and they read this and say, what on earth is going on? Why would God allow this? And like most things in the scripture where it's not fully understood, one thing you're going to need to know about the scriptures is you're always going to need context. Okay? Context. Without context, this is where a lot of people fall into trouble. And the scripture within itself already highlights and insinuates certain things should perk up your ears. But what typically tends to happen is most people that don't actually read the Bible frequently and don't actually understand what it says, they look at this one verse here or this one verse there and they say to themselves, oh, God is this wicked guy, why would he do this? But I want to basically use this time to break down what the Bible actually says. Okay, so first things first. The first thing you need to identify is verse 2, okay? God says something really specific. God says he remembers how Amalek came to fight Israel. So immediately after reading this verse, 1 Samuel 15 verse 1 to 3, what you should do if you're going to give God the benefit of the doubt is actually go back to see what God's talking about here. And that's in Exodus chapter 17. So the first 7 verses in this chapter are basically just dealing with the Israelites complaining to God and ultimately God giving them water. But when we get to verse 8, we get to the prime verse here, which is actually really significant. What does it say? It says, Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. Okay, so we get context here. This is exactly what God is alluding to here in 1 Samuel 15 verse 1 to 3. Okay, Amalek fought with Israel. And from verse 8, okay, all the way to 16, we see the battle. But there's 2 key verses in this text which outline everything that you need to see. So just before verse 14, we see how the Israelites actually win the battle that the Amalekites started. But what do we get in verse 14, which is the key verse? It says, And the Lord said unto Moses, Write this a memorial in a book, and rehearse in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. For he said, Because the Lord hath sworn, the Lord war with Amalek from generation to generation. So what do we see? In verse 14, God says he's going to wipe out Amalek from remembrance. Okay? And then what do we see in verse 16? We see God say in verse 16 that he's going to have continual war with Amalek from generation to generation. So this sets the scene, okay? God is saying, because of this situation right here in Exodus 17, this is why I'm telling you to go and wipe out every man, woman, and child. Well, are you telling me that God said just because of a battle, okay, now women and children have to be killed? Well, hang on tight, because I'm going to give you a couple of more vital scriptures later on in this video, which are going to tell you exactly why this was justified. So if you're reading 1 Samuel 15 verse 1 to 3 and you remember, or you go back to Exodus 17 and you say, okay, hold on, in my mind this doesn't justify God saying the women and the children should get actually killed. And you might have a point, okay? But that's the mistake most people make if they even get past reading 1 Samuel 15 verse 1 to 3 and get back to Exodus 17. What you have to understand is in the Bible teaches about the Bible, okay? So you might get one verse in one place and then another verse in another place that basically gives you the insights about what's actually going on. And this is one of those scenarios. So what you need to look at next is another piece of text in the Bible that gives us more context about what happened here. And that's in Deuteronomy chapter 25. And there's basically 3 verses in this chapter which tell us specifically why God telling them to wipe out the women and children was justified. And I'm also going to give you another piece of text in a minute that's even more categorical than what we're going to read here. So make sure you stick around to see that text as well. So Deuteronomy 25 verse 17 to 19, and look what it says. It says, remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when you were come forth out of Egypt. So it's talking about the exact same scenario that we've covered in Exodus 17. What does it say next? It says, how he met thee by the way and smote the hindmost of thee, all feeble behind thee, when thou faint and weary, and he feared not God. So what's it basically saying then in verse 18? Okay, in verse 18 it says Amalek attacked the hindmost. Okay, and it also says that he attacked the feeble. So who are the feeble? Who are the hindmost? The hindmost is talking about people at the back. Feeble is talking about the most weakest people. Who would be the most weakest people? Women, children, and probably the elderly. Okay, but what else does it say? Which is even takes the cake. It says he attacked them while they were faint. So he didn't even attack the Israelites. Okay, he didn't also attack the ones that were in the back and the most feeble, the weakest, the youngest. Okay, women, children, pregnant women, elderly, young babies, all that kind of stuff. He attacked them while they were weary. And this is what it was talking about here, where God gives them water. Okay, in the first couple of verses in Exodus chapter 17, it's talking about how they didn't have water and they were basically complaining about water. So God ultimately delivered them water. And while that's actually happening, okay, Amalek comes out to fight with them. And now Deuteronomy, okay, which comes after Exodus, which is Moses basically going through the previous books, okay, from Exodus to Numbers. He's basically recounting and giving you now the key piece of insight here, okay, which is that Amalek attacked the back and he attacked the feeble, okay, the weakest, while they were faint. And I mentioned again, there's another piece of text which is even more categorical than this. For those of you thinking, no, hindmost and feeble isn't what we're talking about, I'm going to get into that in a moment. You can see specifically why God actually told him to do this. So to wrap up today's video, okay, why did God order the death of women and children, the whole Amalekites? Okay, we're going to talk about one more piece of text here, which is, I think, very vital. And this is actually in the original piece of text here in 1 Samuel 15. Okay, and the thing we need to see here comes from verse 32 to verse 33. And in this piece of text, basically what happens is, this is after the Israelites have actually gone in and basically had war with the Amalekites. And basically, they don't actually follow through specifically with everything God says. And now, this is the prophet Samuel. He comes along and says, and the prophet Samuel comes along and says, bring out the king Agag, okay? And here what you're going to see is Samuel kills Agag. This is the king. And in verse 33, Samuel tells us a very piece of vital information. He says that Agag's sword, okay, has made women childless. So what is Samuel here giving us information about? Well, he's basically telling us and giving us insights into the fact that Agag, okay, who was the king of the Amalekites, would go around killing pregnant women, okay, with his sword. So when you basically look at all of this situation and you think about the context, okay, in 1 Samuel 15, God tells the Israelites, go and wipe out all of the Amalekites, men, women, children, okay? We see that in 1 Samuel 15. He says, because I remember when Amalek came to fight you. We go back to Exodus 17, which is the first place where we get context about what's actually happening here. This is when the Israelites are faint, they need water. They basically moan to God, God gives them water. But in this situation, Amalek comes out to fight with them, okay? So then Deuteronomy 25 verse 17 to 19 gives us the complete context here, okay? Because it says that Amalek came out when they were faint and he attacked the hindmost, okay, the back, and the most feeble, okay? Women, children, elderly, etc. And then when actually the king of the Amalekites, Agag, is actually killed by Samuel here, Samuel tells us specifically, he says, because your sword has gone about and actually made women childless, I'm going to kill you now, basically, and make your mother childless, etc. So when you're looking at why did God tell the Israelites to wipe out the Amalekites, men, women, children, all those different things, this is specifically why, okay? It's not because God just said, you know what, I don't care about the Amalekites, I don't care about the women and the children. It's because this was judgment based on what the Amalekites did to the Israelites when they came out of Egypt. And this is just one scenario, okay, in the Bible that people misunderstand. You take one verse from one place in the Bible, and without actually going to do the study and actually get the context, you wind up thinking to yourself, oh, God is just this crazy person who wants to kill women and children just for the sake of it, when there's always a significant reason, okay, why judgment has actually fallen on a nation. So on that note, thanks for tuning into this video. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, like the video, share it with your friends and your family, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks and take care.